You've made it. We are beginning to think that you would never find us, but here you are now, drawn to the strange and the sacred. Welcome. I'm Victoria, and I speak on behalf of horror and humanity. That's what they call us, anyways. A cult, a collective, and a sickness, but we prefer community. Anyways, you're not here by accident. Maybe something brought you to us curiosity, loneliness, or that gnawing hunger to understand what makes people believe in the unbelievable, to follow and to obey, and to give up everything for a cause that feels bigger than themselves. But don't be afraid. We're not going to ask for blood, not yet, at least. We just want to show you how we work, how a cult is born, and how it breathes, and how it can transform a person into something unrecognizable and call it salvation. By the end of this video, you'll know how to create your own cult for your horror story, from the hierarchy that binds us, to the doctrine that guides us, and to the rituals that sanctify our pain. We'll teach you everything if you decide to stay, and once you understand our ways, you may never see the world the same again. Welcome to Horror and Humanity. Let's begin your initiation. Now, if you want to write a convincing cult for your horror story, the first thing you need to forget about is the robed figures sacrificing virgins for Satan in the woods. Instead, you're going to start with the human mind and psychology. Cults aren't supernatural, they're entirely human inventions, and the scary thing about them is just how ordinary they can appear and just how reasonable they can sound at first. It's a common myth, and honestly a lazy one, to think that people just join cults that are stupid, weak, or naive, when in reality many cult members are intelligent, empathetic, and even deeply thoughtful people. But they're also vulnerable, and vulnerability is fruitful ground from which cults grow. Real people find themselves drawn to cults in moments of grief, despair, fear, and disillusionment. A person who just lost a child, has gone through a divorce, or freshly out of rehab, or even graduated into a world that doesn't want them. This is the type of person that is searching for meaning, for safety, and for belonging to heal this wound that they have. And a cult steps into their lives to fill that void, and they do it with open arms. And they don't just walk up to them and say, "Hey, join us, we're going to pretend to love you," and then brainwash you. Instead, they say things like, "We have the answers you've been looking for. You're not alone anymore. You've been chosen." They're basically telling the person what they want to hear to initiate a comfy band-aid for their wound. And that's the first thing you need to understand when you're writing a cult, is that cults lead with hope. They offer a better world, a certainty in a chaotic world. The cult doesn't look like a prison at the beginning, instead it looks like a home. Take Midsummer, one of my faves, for example. Danny is grieving, isolated, and emotionally starved. Her boyfriend has checked out, her family is gone, and the world feels cold. So when she arrives in this sun-drenched Swedish commune where everyone smiles, sings, and makes her feel seen, of course she leans into it. And that warmth isn't movie make-believe, that's how real cults work. And once the person is drawn in, the process of indoctrination begins, and it's almost always in a very subtle way. The classic indoctrination formula is often summed up as love bombing, isolation, and control, and it's scary effective. Love bombing is that overwhelming affection and affirmation. They are told that they're special, loved, spiritually gifted, and more clever than the outside world. The cult showers you with attention, people remember your name, bring you food, call you brother and sister. They make you feel, maybe for the first time in your life, that you matter. And once you're emotionally invested, the group begins to gently sever your ties to anyone who could threaten the bond that they've created. They'll start with small sayings like, "Your parents don't really understand you, your friends mock you for your growth." That therapist you're seeing is part of the problem and a part of why you need to give them up. Eventually, you're not just pulled into the group, but you're being cut off from the outside world. You're being physically isolated in compounds, communes, or safe houses. Or if the cult doesn't have those things, then they're trying to socially isolate you in your own home through guilt and control. Either way, the outcome is the same. You now depend on the cult for emotional regulation, community, and answers. Now, here's where the psychological control becomes insidious. Cults don't just control what you think, it's also how you think. Language is one of their most important tools. A trait many cults use is the creation of an internal language or loaded language, where familiar words take on a new meaning and new phrases are introduced to replace critical thinking. And this, as you probably have guessed it, is not by accident. By controlling language, the cult narrows the range of thoughts you can have. And I think George Orwell captured this perfectly with 1984 with Newspeak, which means that reduced vocabulary vocabulary equals reduced thought. So you'll see in cults that truth becomes what the leader says, doubt becomes spiritual attack. Words like cleansing, light, ascension, and purification may sound positive, but they actually are being twisted into euphemisms for punishment, death, or absolute obedience. Phrases like enemies of the truth or sacrifices love doesn't just sound like the leader has a poetic side to them, but they're actually eerily effective at justifying cruelty. If your character starts using this language in their thoughts or inner monologue, it's a clear sign that their worldview is shifting. And that's powerful horror. Now, real world cults are full of these tactics. Take Jonestown, which was led by Jim Jones. He began as a civil rights preacher championing for equality. His followers weren't drawn to madness, but instead they were drawn to the justice he was preaching about. Slowly, he isolated them in a compound in Guyana, cut off their communication, and convinced them that the outside world was coming to destroy them. Revolutionary suicide, as he called it, was framed as a brave act of resistance, and tragically, over 900 people died, including children, and not because they were fools, they were far from that, but because they were convinced they were doing the right thing. Or take a look at Heaven's Gate. Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles told their followers that they were two witnesses from Revelation, and that the earth was to be recycled. Members had to shed their human bodies to ascend to a higher plane. They wore matching clothes, shaved their heads, and believed a spaceship behind the Hale-Bopp comet would take them home. Applewhite refined his words like exit, vehicle, and next level to support his theology. Now, as you can see, these cults didn't rely on supernatural fear. They relied on reshaping the mind through love, isolation, and language. So when you're writing your cult, here are a few things to ask yourself. First, what does the cult fulfill for your character? Is it safety, identity, redemption? Second, how do they use affirmation and language to gain control? Third, when does your character begin using the group's phrases without thinking? Fourth, at what point is the outside world no longer real to them? And lastly, what are they willing to do to protect this new world they found? Because that's where the dread becomes unbearable. Now that you understand the psychology behind how cults manipulate and absorb people, you now need to build the machinery of the cult, which is the structure, the hierarchy, and the culture of your cult. Think of it like writing a government, church, or military. Your cult has ranks, rules, rituals, punishments, doctrine, and lore. When creating a cult, you're really building a closed world, and every rule within it must be airtight because your character will be living inside of it. When you look at real world cults, many of them follow hierarchical religious structures. At the top, there's usually a single charismatic leader who claims a divine connection, access to truth, or exclusive knowledge of salvation. This person, whether they're calling themselves a prophet, a guru, or messiah, or some ridiculous name that they come up with, they become the axis around which the entire world orbits around. Then beneath them, you'll find the elders, officers, or high-ranking initiates who enforce the leader's will and ensure ideological purity among the ranks. These middle managers may have once been victims too, but as you know, power corrupts, and they often become enforcers, abusers, or gatekeepers. And lower down are the general members, often divided by status. There's the newly initiated and the committed, and then the fallen. Some cults create elaborate systems of rank or purification where members earn status by proving their devotion, which could be things like making sacrifices, turning others in who may do something that's against the rules or try to leave, or in many common day cults, they give more and more money to the cult, which boosts their position. That internal competition that this group has becomes a tool for control because they're too busy climbing the ladder or afraid to fall down from it to question what's really going on. Now, for your writing, this structure gives you so much power to build tension. Imagine your protagonist slowly climbing through the ranks, thinking they're getting closer to the truth, only to realize that the truth is a lie. Or imagine the horror of betrayal when a friend who's a higher ranking member punishes them for disobedience. But having a structure alone isn't enough. You also need a belief system. You need to know what your cult believes in and why does it feel so compelling to them. This is your doctrine, and the scariest doctrine in fiction and reality always twists something true into something deadly. Maybe your cult believes the world is ending and only they have the knowledge to survive the oncoming apocalypse. Maybe they believe they are chosen to purify society. Or maybe they worship a forgotten god and fear the oncoming judgment when the day that they finally arrive. But regardless of whatever they believe in, it should feel real to them. Now, a cult's theology is rarely complex, and honestly, it doesn't need to be. All it really needs is certainty. In a chaotic and painful world, the cult offers a simple structure. Here's why you're suffering, here's how to stop it, and here's what to do next. A lot of times, the theology includes a cosmic enemy like an outsider group or force that threatens their safety. And you might hear the leader saying things like, the world is corrupted, the unbelievers are poisoned, and the government is watching us. These fears allow the cult to justify pretty much anything from secrecy to violence and even murder. Rituals also play a huge role here. It might be in the form of a prayer, fasting, confession, chanting, dancing, sleep deprivation, or even sexual cleansing. And these rituals serve multiple purposes. They bind members together in shared action. They create emotional intensity that gets tied to belief, and they weaken the body and mind, making the person more easily swayed and complicit. And a ritual can be beautiful, strange, or deeply disturbing, but it should always mean something. So when you're creating a ritual, ask yourself, what does this action reinforce, and what lie does it make feel true? Now, dear initiate, let's talk about recruitment. Cults rarely advertise themselves honestly. They don't just stand there with signs saying, hey, we're a cult, come join us. Instead, they disguise themselves as self-help programs, wellness retreats, spiritual communities, activist groups, or support circles. They offer exactly what people are desperate to find. Things like healing, purpose, connection, and transformation. And that's what makes them so alluring and so dangerous. So recruitment usually starts with love bombing, which is, as I've explained before, an overwhelming flood of affection, praise, and acceptance that makes the person feel seen or valued like never before. They might be told that they're special, chosen, or uniquely gifted by the recruiter. This is so that they can create a powerful emotional bond early on with that person. At the same time, cults are also really good at identifying personal struggles, and recruiters have been trained to spot vulnerabilities like grief, loneliness, addiction, heartbreak, or low self-esteem. Whatever the wound, the cult can find a way to position themselves as a cure for the emotional ailment the person might have. And if this person does decide to join, then slowly the demands will begin to creep in, like a small donation, a weekly retreat, a new diet, a required reading list, and before they know it, your character is isolated from their old self. The hook here isn't fear, it's belonging, and that's why it's so scary when your character realizes that the yoga retreat they signed up for isn't about inner peace, but rather about submission, or when the group that helps them through their grief now demands a vow of silence and obedience, and warns them that they can never leave. Effective cult recruitment isn't coercion at first, it's seduction. It's the promise of becoming your best self or finally feeling whole. And then when the mask slips, it's often too late. Now let's talk about control tactics. To maintain control, cults like to use psychological warfare disguised as spiritual progress. Guilt and shame are used as weapons. Members are taught that doubt is weakness and that questioning their doctrine is disobedience, and that is a big no. The punishment for doing so might be public shaming, solitary confinement, loss of status, or even being cut off from the group. And in the mind of a cult member who's already deeply invested in the cult, losing the group also means losing their purpose, family, identity, and salvation. You can exploit this in your writing by creating scenarios where your character is forced to choose between self-preservation and truth. Maybe they see something that horribly and truly rattles them, but if they speak up, they'll be expelled, shunned, or harmed. So they have to decide to stay quiet because they're genuinely terrified. And that's how the horror becomes internal, because now they have to ask themselves how much of themselves are they willing to lose before they speak out. Things like sleep deprivation, food restrictions, sexual manipulation, and surveillance are all common in real cults. But again, don't use them for the single sake of shock value, because if your reader is somebody like me, then they'll desensitize very quickly to it, because the more it happens, the more your story will start to become boring. So instead of for the sole purpose of shock value, instead use them to show how control becomes complete. The body breaks down, the will weakens, and the lies become truth. Now, we can't forget about the mastermind behind all the madness, the cult leader. I'm going to have an entire video dedicated to this about creating a cult leader, but we can't leave them out entirely because the leader is the sun around which the entire cult system orbits. So the cult leader doesn't have to be overtly evil. The best ones truly believe what they say, and that's what makes them so dangerous. They might actually start as someone who actually wants to help people, then slowly become addicted to the power and obedience they receive from their followers. Or they may believe they've been chosen by God, a spirit, or the universe. This type of cult leader often warps their narcissism in spiritual language with things like, I am the voice of truth, I alone can save you. In your story, you can make the cult leader character charismatic and magnetic, but also greatly manipulative. But they can also be quiet, calculating, and almost the invisible type. You don't have to make them an insanely over-the-top cartoon villain. Make them messianic. Make people love them. Make your readers want to believe in them. Then show what it costs to do so. In real life, leaders like David Koresh, Shoko Ashishara, and Keith Rainier, they controlled people's lives, bodies, and minds, often to devastating ends. And they spoke like saviors and destroyed like tyrants. And in your writing, your cult leader can be anyone from a grieving mother who thinks her dead child is speaking to her to a burnt-out therapist who invents a healing philosophy that spirals out of control. Or maybe they're a nobody, someone like a janitor, dropout, or former addict who convinces others they found the truth. The horror isn't that these people want to hurt other people, it's that they believe they're saving them. Now that we've explored the body of the cult, let's see how these parts are held together through rituals and doctrine. So ritual plays a crucial role in cult dynamics, and it can take many forms from prayer, fasting, confession, chanting, dancing, sleep deprivation, or even go on the more disturbing side of acts like sexual cleansing. These rituals serve a few vital functions. First, they bind the members together through shared experience. Second, they generate emotional highs that become tied to belief. And lastly, they weaken the body and mind, making members more susceptible to suggestion and control. But also remember that rituals should always mean something. Whether it's beautiful, strange, or deeply unsettling, it must reinforce a specific belief or lie. So when creating a ritual, you want to ask yourself, what idea does this action implant into the reader's head, and what lies about it makes it feel true? Now look at the Order of Solar Temple, for example, which combined apocalyptic Christianity, Templar imagery, and New Age beliefs. Their rituals involved ceremonial robes, secret initiations, and symbolic deaths. It all felt like a spiritual epic, but it all tragically ended in mass suicide. Or look at the Children of God, a cult that used ritualized sex as a tool for divine connection and rephrased abuse as salvation. The horror comes from the contradiction of seeing something pure like spirituality, love, and identity used to destroy. So as you can see now, at its core, rituals are behavioral conditioning. It provides rhythm, structure, and a sense of belonging. And it's through its repetition that it slowly reshapes the brain. That's why many cults begin with small, subtle practices like silent meals, group prayers, shared sleeping arrangements, or waking up at 4 a.m. to chant a phrase no one questions. These acts may seem small, but together, over time, they erode individuality and reinforce dependence on the group. So when you're writing this, don't be afraid to invent your own creepy and disturbing rituals. Maybe members are required to smile at mirrors until they cry, or they take part in ceremonies where they burn old photos and rename themselves, or confess their past sins to a crowd trained to clap and cry on cue like robots. And remember, these practices shouldn't just exist to shock the reader, but they should make sense within the cult's worldview, because they're not just doing it for the shits and giggles, they're doing it to reinforce belonging, obedience, and the transformation, one ritual at a time. And now we turn to the doctrine, which is the scaffolding around all of this. In your writing, doctrine has to work, but not logically, but emotionally. It has to make the character's pain feel meaningful. And by all means, this does not mean that you have to invent a 300-page cult Bible, but you should at least invent some excerpts, verses, chants, and teachings that the followers repeat daily. The more vague and poetic, the better, because then it allows followers to fill in the blanks. And to make this easier on you, you can base your doctrine on real ideologies and then twist it. But please be respectful of the ideology that you're taking inspiration from. So to do this, you're going to start with something true like self-improvement, environmentalism, or fear of technology, then manipulate it. Let the cult say, pain is proof of your healing, or may the broken be made whole. Then make them believe the world outside is sick, corrupt, and infected, and that only the cult can offer the cure for this. Also, doctrine should have a us versus them structure, so think of it like this. Followers equals chosen, outsiders equal dangerous. In cults, there's always a scapegoat, a villain, an outside force the cult blames for the world's suffering. And salvation is only found through suffering, surrender, or service, but preferably and usually all three. In the end, your cult should feel like a trap made of silk, beautiful on the outside and irresistible at first. But step by step, layer by layer, it replaces your character's thoughts with its own. That's when the horror becomes real. Now let's talk about the setting and vibe of your cult. Think of the setting like a weapon. It shapes how your cult feels and how it also sets the tone for the upcoming dread and tragedy. Let's start with the classic, which is the remote mountain retreat. This is your far from the world vibe. Think of cabin in the woods, isolated compounds, or communes in the desert. For cults, distance equals power. So when the cult can remove you from society, they can control your access to information, your sense of time, and even your ability to leave. Physical isolation makes emotional isolation easier to enforce. You can't call for help when there's no cell service and the only roads out are guarded for miles. But isolation doesn't always have to mean rural. Now we have the urban cult, which can be a modest apartment building, a basement beneath a private laundromat, or a private yoga studio tucked behind glass doors in an upscale neighborhood. These settings are scarier because they feel so close to home and familiar. A cult that exists in a city suggests that this could happen anywhere and it might even be happening next door to you and you don't even know. Then there's the digital cult, which is one of the most scariest modern versions of a cult. Cults that form from wellness forums, mental health subreddits, Discord servers, or through charismatic live streamers. These cults don't need a compound because they live in your phone or computer. They're in your feed, they prey on isolation, algorithmically enforcing their dogma with every click. The descent is slower, subtler, and often harder to escape because it doesn't feel like a cult at all. It just feels like a community, a place where you can find belonging and like-minded people, and sometimes even hope. So for the setting and vibe of your cult, ask yourself, what mood do you want to create? Is your setting claustrophobic, sterile, or beautiful in a way that makes the horror feel sacred? A cult can live in a moss-covered monastery or a hospital white office building. Either can be terrifying if you lean into the emotional texture. The setting should reflect the cult's values and the fears you want to plant into your reader. So wasn't that enlightening? I'm so glad you chose to spend your time with me. It's not a coincidence you found this place. People arrive here when they're ready, when something inside begins to stir, to question, and to hunger. And if you've made it this far, then maybe, just maybe, you're one of us. But don't worry. You don't have to decide right away. Take your time, watch it again if you need to. Let the truth settle into your bones. But we here at Horror and Humanity only ask one thing from you, that you keep your mind open and your loyalty pure. And if you felt something during this video like a pull, a presence, a quiet voice just beneath your skin, don't ignore it. That's not fear, that's recognition. So until next time, stay devoted, stay obedient, and stay exactly where you are. We're always watching and we're always waiting. Bye-bye.